The town of Dry Creek lay still under the late afternoon sun, its main street shimmering with heat waves and coated in dust so fine it clung to every step. The saloon doors swung lazily as if even the wind was too tired to stir. Then, suddenly, the peace shattered. A figure stumbled into view, barefoot, ragged, and clutching a bundle close to her chest as though it were her last possession on earth. The townsfolk froze where they stood. Horses snorted uneasily at the hitching posts, sensing the panic in the air. Men pulled their hats low, women drew children close. This was no ordinary drifter. Her dress was torn, nearly to rags, streaked with dirt and blood. Her hair, once fair, was matted and wild around her face. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words, and when she finally did, they cut through the silence like a knife. "Kill me quickly!" The plea wasn't shouted but whispered, hoarse, desperate, yet loud enough to still every hand, every breath. Some gasped, others muttered prayers. No one moved to her aid. They had seen enough in this land to know when death came calling. She staggered forward, the bundle slipping in her hands, revealing corners of folded letters marked with dark stains. She didn't look at anyone, didn't beg for water or help. Instead, she kept repeating it under her breath. "Kill me quickly. Kill me quickly," as if it were the only thing tethering her to the world. At the edge of the crowd, a man rose slowly from his seat outside the saloon. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face cut sharp with years of battles won and lost, his eyes carried something heavier than pity. They carried judgment. He was known simply as the Judge. Not a man of the courts, but one who had earned the name by the way he meted out justice across the frontier. Once, he'd been just another gunslinger, feared for his quick draw. But after burying too many good men and won too many regrets, he'd sworn off killing for sport or revenge. Now, he carried his revolver like a holy man carried a cross, only for when there was no other way. When the woman collapsed at his boots, the crowd's murmur rose. Some said to put her out of her misery, to grant her the mercy she begged for. Others muttered that she was cursed, carrying trouble straight into their town. The judge said nothing at first, only bent down to lift her chin. Her eyes, rimmed red and swollen, met his, and for the first time she faltered. His gaze didn't promise mercy nor cruelty. It promised reckoning. "You don't need death," he said, his voice low but firm enough to hush the whispers around them. "You need justice." The words cut through her like a lash. She shook her head violently, clutching the letters tighter. "You don't understand. Justice won't save me. Death will." But he did not move to draw his revolver. Instead, he scooped her up in his arms with a gentleness that contradicted his rugged frame. He carried her past the gaping onlookers, into the cool shade of the saloon, laying her down on a table cleared by a nervous bartender. The crowd spilled in after them, demanding answers. The judge stood tall, his shadow stretching long against the wooden walls. "She lives," he declared, his voice like gravel rolling down a canyon. "And as long as she breathes, the truth she carries will see light. No man or woman here will raise a hand against her." The crowd fell silent, some with fear, others with respect. The woman lay trembling, her lips still forming the words of her plea, though softer now, as if she no longer quite believed them. For the first time since she had staggered into Dry Creek, death was not at her side. It was being held at bay by the will of one man whose eyes burned, not with the relief of a killer, but with the fire of justice long denied. They called him the Judge, though no court had ever appointed him, no government had ever given him authority. His title was earned the hard way, out on the edge of nowhere, where law and order often came at the end of a smoking barrel. Folks said he'd once been the fastest gun in 3 territories, a man who never missed and never hesitated. In his youth, he'd been feared, and he carried that reputation like a second skin. But the years had carved lines into his face and ghosts into his eyes. Now, when he drew his revolver, it wasn't for pride or coin. It was for justice. When the broken woman at his feet begged for death, the old reflex in him had stirred. He could have done it. One clean shot, quick and merciful, the way a cowboy puts down a lame horse. The crowd would have approved. Death was simple, and simple made men comfortable. But the judge had learned long ago that mercy wasn't always in a bullet. Sometimes, it was in forcing a soul to live when all they wanted was the grave. The saloon quieted after his declaration. No one dared challenge him directly. Even the meanest card sharps and gun thugs in Dry Creek lowered their eyes when the judge's voice carried that iron edge. He turned his attention back to the woman who lay trembling but stubbornly alive. Her knuckles were white around the bundle of letters, as though letting go would mean surrendering the last thread of her existence. "You'll get no grave from me," he told her, crouching low so only she could hear. "But you will get truth. You will get justice. If that burns worse than dying, so be it." Her eyes widened, glistening with pain and disbelief. "You don't know what they'll do to me if I'm taken back. I've seen what they do. I've lived it." The judge's gaze hardened. He had heard words like hers before. Once long ago, his own kin had pleaded for his mercy in a burning farmhouse. He had been too slow then. That guilt rode with him every mile since. He would not fail this woman. Not in the same way. Straightening, he turned to the gathered townsfolk. "She is under my protection," he announced, his voice a hammer striking steel. "And any man that thinks to challenge that will answer to me." There were grumbles, some of fear, some of resentment. Dry Creek was a town that survived by keeping its head low when the storm came through. The last thing they wanted was to be caught in the crosshairs of an outlaw's vengeance. But the judge was not asking. He was declaring, as he always did, that justice would not bow to convenience. Later, in the quiet of a back room, he sat across from the woman. A lantern flickered between them, casting shadows that made her look more ghost than flesh. "Tell me your name," he said. She hesitated, lips trembling as though the very act of speaking it would summon her enemies. Finally, she whispered, "Clara, Clara," he repeated, rolling the name over his tongue like a vow. "You've walked into the lion's mouth carrying something men are willing to kill for. If you want me to fight for you, you'll have to trust me with the truth." She clutched the letters tighter, her voice breaking. "The truth is a death sentence." The judge leaned forward, his eyes burning not with cruelty but with something fiercer, unyielding resolve. "No, the truth is justice. And justice is the only thing keeping you alive." For a long moment they sat in silence, the night pressing in heavy around the saloon walls. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled, the sound carried on the desert wind like a warning. Clara shivered. The judge, however, remained still as stone. He had chosen his path the moment she had fallen at his feet. He would not kill her quickly. He would keep her alive, long enough to drag the devil she feared into the light. The next morning, Clara woke in the cramped back room of the Dry Creek saloon. Her wrists ached from how tightly she had held the bundle of letters all night, as if someone might pry them from her even in her sleep. She blinked against the lantern light. And there he was, the judge, sitting silent in a chair, arms folded across his chest, eyes fixed on her as though he hadn't moved once since the night before. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming, but the ache in her body reminded her otherwise. The cracked ribs from running, the raw blisters on her feet, the bruises from rough hands that had once claimed ownership of her. "Eat," the judge said, his voice gravelly but not unkind, nodding to a plate of bread and beans left on the table. Clara shook her head. "You don't understand. Food won't keep me alive. Not from them." The judge leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Then tell me who they are. Tell me why you came crawling into my town asking for death instead of help." Her lips pressed tight, trembling. She had vowed to take her story to the grave, to spare herself the humiliation of speaking the truth. But when she met his gaze, Steady and unwavering, something inside her cracked. He was not a man easily swayed, but neither did he look at her like she was already lost. He looked at her as if she was evidence, living, breathing proof of a crime that demanded reckoning. So she began. Her voice was a whisper at first, hesitant, carrying years of buried shame. She had been just 16 when her family was slaughtered on their ranch. Bandits had ridden through, led by a man with eyes like flint and a voice like poison. He took her alive, not out of mercy, but out of cruelty. He forced her into marriage, making her a trophy of conquest. The price for her compliance was her little brother's life. He was kept as a bargaining chip, beaten if she ever tried to resist. "You think I was his wife?" She spat bitterly, her face twisting in disgust. "No, I was his prisoner. A chain he could flaunt." Her fists clenched around the letters, the crumpled paper stained with sweat. But I listened. I watched. He thought me broken, silent. He never knew I was reading what he left behind, copying what I could. Routes, names, shipments of rifles, lists of sheriffs who turned their badges into silver bought with blood. She shoved the papers across the table. "These letters are all I have." "My brother. They killed him anyway." Her voice cracked then, and for a long while the room was filled only by her ragged sobs. The judge said nothing, letting the grief run its course. His face unreadable, but his jaw set hard. When she quieted, he picked up the letters, scanning them with sharp eyes. "You carry more than your own tragedy," he muttered. "This is a network. Smugglers, killers, traitors in the law. If this spreads, the whole territory will burn." Clara's shoulders sagged. "That's why I asked you to kill me. Once they learn I've run, they'll come. And when they do, they won't stop until I'm in the ground." The judge set the letters down carefully, then looked at her with that same fire she had seen the night before. "Then let them come. I've faced worse devils. You'll live to see them fall." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't fight them all. You'll die trying." His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but carried the weight of conviction. Better to die for justice than live without it. For the first time, Clara's plea for death faltered on her tongue. In its place, a small, fragile spark of something she hadn't felt in years, hope, flickered in the shadows. By dawn, the judge and Clara were already on the move. Dry Creek was too exposed, too full of nervous whispers. The outlaw's men would be looking for her, and if they learned where she had gone, the town would pay the price. The judge had seen it before, whole settlements razed to ash for sheltering a fugitive. He would not let that happen again. The two rode out on separate horses, the desert stretching before them like an endless sheet of copper under the rising sun. Clara rode stiffly, unused to the saddle after weeks of running on foot, but she didn't complain. She kept the bundle of letters close to her chest, wrapped now in oilskin to protect them from the wind. The judge rode beside her, silent except for the occasional scan of the horizon. He was thinking, piecing together what he had read in the letters the night before. Routes for smuggling weapons, lists of names, including a few sheriffs he'd once called allies, payment records marked with crude symbols that might stand for entire gangs. If the letters were true, then Clara had stumbled onto more than a private vendetta. This was a network of crime that could stretch across 3 territories. He reined in his horse at a rocky rise and scanned the plain with a spyglass. Nothing but scrub and sand for miles. Still, his gut told him they were being followed. "They'll be on us soon," he muttered. Clara's grip on the reins tightened. "They'll kill me," she said softly. "And you too. You don't understand what he's capable of." The judge lowered the spyglass, his expression as unreadable as stone. "I understand better than you think." He had faced men like her captor before, men who thrived on fear and control. The difference was that this time he was prepared. They stopped at a creek to water the horses. Clara crouched by the bank, splashing her face, watching the judge with wary eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "You could have given me what I asked for. 1 bullet. Quick, clean! You wouldn't be in danger now." He stared at the water for a moment, then answered without looking at her. "Because I've buried enough innocence to know the difference between mercy and surrender." "You're alive," That means you've still got a chance to make them answer for what they've done. She looked down at the water, her reflection wavering. I don't want justice, she whispered. I just want it to end, his voice hardened. Justice is how it ends. They moved on, taking a narrow canyon route to avoid the main trails. The judge's mind worked like a clockwork machine, planning every step ahead. They would head east to the rail line, then north to the capital, where a federal judge could grant Clara protection and use her testimony to tear the network apart. But every mile they rode was a mile of open ground where an ambush could come from anywhere. By midday, they found the first sign of pursuit, a crow circling low over the trail behind them, then another. The judge's hand dropped to his revolver. Scouts, he said grimly. They're closer than I thought. Clara's heart thudded. Then it's already too late. He looked at her, his eyes burning with that same fierce resolve she had seen before. No, it's just begun. That night they camped in a rocky hollow, the fire small and hidden from sight. Clara sat close, clutching the letters. For the first time, she asked him about himself, not out of curiosity, but out of a kind of desperate need to understand the man risking everything for her. He didn't tell her much, only that he'd once failed someone who needed him. Someone he couldn't save. Clara didn't press him. But as she lay down to sleep, she realized she was no longer whispering for death. She was whispering for dawn. Somewhere out in the dark, the outlaw's men were already closing in, leaving a trail of blood in their wake. But for the first time since she'd fled, Clara felt she wasn't alone. The desert night was never truly quiet. Coyotes yipped in the distance, owls called from the cliffs, and the wind whispered across the stones. But Clara could tell the difference between nature's voice and the sound of men. She woke with a start sometime after midnight, heart pounding, certain she had heard the crunch of boots on gravel. The judge was already awake. He sat at the edge of the camp, revolver in one hand, eyes locked on the darkness. He didn't turn when she stirred. Stay low, he whispered. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The small fire they had built was nearly out, just embers now, but it made her feel exposed. She could see nothing beyond the faint glow. Yet she trusted his instincts. He was like a wolf, ears pricked, body taut, waiting for the strike. Minutes dragged on. Then came the sound again, closer this time, rocks shifting under weight. A whistle cut through the air, too shrill and deliberate to belong to any bird. It was answered by another, farther off. They've found us, Clara breathed. The judge rose slowly, pulling his wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes. Stay behind the rocks. Don't move until I say. Before she could answer, shadows detached from the canyon walls, 3 riders, their silhouettes jagged against the starlight. Another figure appeared on foot, creeping closer with a rifle in hand. Clara bit back a scream. These were the men who had haunted her every nightmare, the kind who would drag her back to her captor alive, just to make her suffer longer. The judge moved like iron given life. He didn't fire right away. Instead, he stepped into the open, voice calm, carrying across the rocks. You boys are far from camp. Why don't you lay down your arms and ride home before I send you there in pine boxes? The riders laughed, harsh and cold. One of them spat into the dust. We ain't here for you, old man. Hand over the girl and we might let you keep breathing. The judge's revolver rose in a blur. The crack of the shot echoed through the canyon, and the rifleman dropped, weapon clattering. Chaos erupted. Gunfire sparked against the stones, bullets whining past Clara as she ducked down. The horses screamed, rearing as lead filled the air. Through it all, the judge moved with terrifying precision. He didn't waste bullets. Every shot had purpose. One rider fell clutching his shoulder, another's horse bolted, throwing him into the dirt. But there were too many, and they pressed hard, determined to drag Clara out from her hiding place. Her pulse hammered. She clutched the bundle of letters so tightly the paper cut into her skin. She thought of running, of disappearing into the night. But the memory of the judge's words anchored her. Justice is how it ends. A rough hand suddenly grabbed her from behind, yanking her out from the rocks. Clara gasped, struggling, but the outlaw's grip was iron. He dragged her into the open, shouting, "Drop the gun, Judge, or she's dead!" The world froze. The judge stood 10 paces away, revolver raised, his eyes blazing in the firelight. Clara saw in them not fear, not hesitation, but calculation, justice burning hotter than the desert sun. And then, with a motion so fast she barely followed it, he shifted aim. The shot rang out, shattering the outlaw's wrist. Clara was free, falling to the ground as her captor screamed and staggered back. The others fled then, realizing the fight was lost. The canyon fell silent except for Clara's ragged breathing. The judge holstered his revolver and helped her to her feet. "You see now?" he said quietly. "They'll keep coming. But as long as you breathe, they don't win." Clara swallowed hard, staring at the blood-stained dirt. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was standing in the middle of a war, and the judge had made her part of it. The next day dawned gray, the sky veiled with clouds heavy as lead. Clara and the judge rode on in silence, leaving the blood-stained canyon behind. Clara's body was sore, her nerves frayed thin as spider silk. Every hoofbeat on the trail echoed like a death drum. The judge rode ahead, shoulders squared, scanning the horizon with that tireless gaze of his. He looked unshaken, but Clara could feel the weight of what had happened pressing down on her chest. She replayed the night's attack again and again, the shadows, the gunfire, the hands dragging her into the open. She still felt those fingers on her arms. She still smelled the sweat and blood of men who wanted nothing more than to break her all over again. By midday, they stopped at a dry ravine to water the horses. Clara slid off the saddle with trembling legs and stumbled a few paces away, hugging herself tightly. The judge tethered the horses and unpacked a canteen, but when he turned, he saw her standing there like a brittle reed about to snap. "Clara," he said, voice steady but not unkind. She spun on him suddenly, her eyes wild, her voice shaking with rage and despair. "Why didn't you do it?" she cried. "Why didn't you kill me when I begged you to? Do you see what's happening? They'll never stop! Every mile we ride, they're behind us. Every shadow hides a hand ready to drag me back. You could have spared me all this. You could have ended it!" Her voice broke into sobs, the sound raw and guttural. She fell to her knees, clutching the dirt, her whole body shaking. "I can't keep running," she whispered. "I can't keep living like this. I'd rather die than be their prisoner again." For a long moment, the judge stood silent. He didn't move to comfort her, didn't kneel beside her like some might. Instead, he let the storm of her grief break fully, let it tear through the air until she was spent, shoulders heaving, tears carving lines down her dust-streaked face. Only then did he step closer, his shadow falling over her. "You think death is freedom," he said slowly, his voice deep as a canyon echo. "But it ain't, it's just silence. You've carried pain for so long you think it's all you are. But you're more than that, Clara. You're a witness. You're the proof that men like him can be dragged into the light." She shook her head violently. "Justice won't bring back my brother. Justice won't erase what he did to me." "No," the judge admitted, his tone sharpening, unflinching. "Justice don't heal the past, but it stops it from repeating. It makes sure no one else lives through what you did. And it gives you something no bullet can, dignity. A voice." Clara lifted her tear-swollen eyes to him, trembling. "I don't have the strength for that." His gaze locked with hers, fierce and relentless. "Then borrow mine." Something in his words struck her deeper than any gunshot could. For so long she had felt hollow, powerless, nothing more than a vessel for suffering. But here was a man who refused to let her drown in it, who demanded she stand even when she could not on her own. Clara pushed herself to her feet, swaying but upright. The judge didn't reach out to steady her. He let her stand on her own legs even if they shook. For the first time, she wasn't begging for death. She was staring it down, holding it at bay. The judge nodded once as though they had struck an unspoken bargain. "Good," he said simply, his eyes burning with that same unyielding fire. "Then let's ride. We've got a long way to go, and a reckoning waiting at the end." As they mounted and set off again, Clara felt something stir inside her, a fragile, stubborn ember of will. She wasn't ready to call it hope, not yet, but it was enough to keep her moving, enough to keep her alive. Red Mesa loomed in the distance like the bones of a giant, jagged cliffs of rust-red stone jutting into the sky, casting long shadows over the desert floor. It was a place whispered about in saloons and campfires, a canyon notorious for ambushes. Travelers avoided it if they could, but the judge rode toward it with grim purpose, Clara trailing close behind. By now, she knew better than to question his choices outright. But as the mesa grew nearer, dread crawled into her throat. "This place," she murmured. "It's a killing ground." The judge's jaw tightened. "Exactly why we're going there," she blinked, stunned. "You're leading them to us?" He finally looked at her, his eyes burning like embers under the brim of his hat. "They'll keep chasing. Every night, every mile, they'll tighten the noose. We can't outrun them forever. Best to choose where the fight happens and make it on my terms." Clara's stomach knotted. She wanted to scream that he was mad, that dragging her into the lion's den was suicide. But another voice whispered inside her, quieter but sharper. "He hasn't failed you yet." By dusk, they reached a sheltered hollow at the canyon's mouth. The judge dismounted, his movements precise, deliberate. He scouted the terrain, noting choke points where riders would be forced into narrow passes. He marked loose rocks perched on ledges, dry brush that could be lit like tinder, hollows deep enough for cover. Every detail he stored away like a chess player arranging pieces on a board. Clara watched him work, awe mingling with fear. "You've done this before," she said softly. "More times than I care to count," he replied without looking at her. "But this time it ends with more than just bullets. We'll bring him down. Your outlaw, his men, and the vipers he's feeding." "How?" she asked. The judge pulled a scrap of paper from his coat, a forged note. Its writing rough, but passable. "I'll make them believe I'm handing you over. They'll come in numbers, hungry, careless, and when they do," his eyes scanned the mesa, sharp as a hawk's. "We closed the trap." The plan chilled her to the bone. She imagined being dragged into the open again, shackled under her captor's sneer. "And if the trap fails?" "Then we fight." His tone was flat, certain. That night, as stars littered the sky, they prepared. Clara's hands shook as she helped stack stones for cover and scatter brush in places the judge pointed out. He taught her how to load a rifle, how to cock it steady. Her arms trembled under the weight of the weapon, but he placed his calloused hands over hers. "Don't think about killing," he told her. "Think about surviving. Aim to hold the line, not end it. Leave the rest to me." She nodded, swallowing hard. It was the first time anyone had put a gun in her hands, not to threaten her, but to trust her. As the night deepened, Clara lay awake under the canyon's looming cliffs, her heart racing with each gust of wind that carried phantom hoofbeats. She thought of her brother, of the life stolen from her, and she thought of the judge, sitting awake as always, eyes fixed on the dark horizon, waiting for the enemy to come. When dawn's first light touched the mesa, Clara understood. This wasn't just a battle. It was a reckoning. And whether she lived or died, she would face it not as prey, but as a witness. The judge rose, checking his revolver, his silhouette stark against the rising sun. "Today," he said quietly, "we stop running." The sun rose blood-red over Red Mesa, staining the cliffs with fire. Clara stood in the shadow of the rocks, her heart hammering like a drum. She clutched the rifle the judge had given her, its weight alien in her hands. She wasn't a fighter. She had never been one. And yet here she was, waiting for the men who had destroyed her life to ride straight into their trap. Beside her, the judge was steady as stone. He crouched at the canyon mouth, eyes sharp, revolver resting loose in his grip. His calm unnerved her. Did he feel no fear at all, or had he simply learned to bury it so deep it no longer showed? The first sound came with the dawn wind, the faint thunder of hooves rolling across the earth. Clara froze. Dust plumes rose on the horizon, growing thicker as riders surged closer. She could hear their shouts now, the metallic jingle of spurs, the cruel laughter of men who believed they were riding to claim an easy prize. "They're here," she whispered. The judge didn't look at her. His voice was low, steady. "Remember what I told you. Aim to hold, not to kill. Let them come close. When I give the word, light the brush? Clara nodded, her throat dry as sand. She crouched lower, finger trembling near the trigger. The outlaws poured into the canyon like a river of steel and leather, nearly 24 strong. At their head rode the man she feared most, the outlaw leader, the one who had stolen her life. His black coat whipped in the wind, his eyes scanning the rocks with cold calculation. When his gaze swept past her hiding place, Clara felt herself shrink into the stone. "Bring me the girl," he roared, his voice booming against the canyon walls. "I want her alive!" The judge rose from cover, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. "You want her?" His voice carried like thunder. "Then come and take her." Gunfire erupted. The judge's revolver barked, each shot precise. Horses screamed, men shouted, chaos rippled through the canyon as bullets sparked against stone. Clara's breath caught. Then she saw the signal. The judge's hand cutting through the air. With shaking hands, she struck a match and tossed it into the brush piled high at the choke point. Flames leapt to life, racing through the dry branches. Smoke billowed, choking the canyon. Horses reared, panicked, throwing their riders. The narrow pass became a trap of fire and stone. The judge pressed forward, his revolver a blur. He didn't shoot to kill, not unless he had no choice. One outlaw dropped clutching a leg, another screamed as his gun hand shattered. Clara saw it clearly. He wasn't trying to butcher them. He was dismantling them, breaking their power piece by piece. Then came the moment she dreaded. The outlaw leader spotted her through the haze. His sneer twisted into something monstrous. "Clara!" he bellowed, spurring his horse straight toward her. Terror froze her body. She lifted the rifle, but her aim wavered wildly. The judge's shout cut through her panic. "Steady!" Clara sucked in a breath, braced the rifle the way he'd shown her, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked, missing his heart but grazing his shoulder. He howled, tumbling from his saddle. The impact jarred through her body. She had struck him. She had faced him and not folded. The judge was on him in an instant, boot pressing him down, revolver aimed square between his eyes. The canyon went still, smoke swirling in the silence. The outlaws who could still stand dropped their weapons, their leader broken before them. Clara stumbled forward, her chest heaving. The man who had caged her for years looked up at her with venom, waiting for her to beg, to break. But she didn't. She stood tall, rifle still in her hands, and said with a voice she barely recognized as her own, "I will testify. I will see you hang." The judge's eyes burned, not with bloodlust, but with grim satisfaction. He holstered his revolver. "Justice," he said coldly, "not death." And for the first time in years, Clara felt something stronger than fear coursing through her veins. She felt free. Well, weeks later, the courthouse in Santa Fe was so full that men and women spilled out onto the dusty street, pressing against the windows just to hear. Everyone knew the tale already. How the judge had captured a gang feared across 3 territories, how their leader had been dragged in, shackled and beaten, cursing every step. But rumors never held the weight of truth, and today, truth would be spoken aloud. Clara stood at the witness bench, her palms sweating despite the cool morning air drifting through the open windows. She wore a plain dress borrowed from the boarding house matron, her hair braided tight, her face pale but resolute. Every eye in the room was on her, not with the leering hunger she had once known, but with something sharper. Expectation. The outlaw leader sat across the room, chained and guarded, his face a mask of fury. Even bound, he seemed to radiate menace. His black coat was gone, but his sneer remained, as if he still believed he held power over her. Clara's chest tightened when their eyes met, but she refused to look away. The judge sat in the back, his broad frame casting a long shadow, hat pulled low. He didn't interfere, didn't whisper encouragement. His very presence was enough. When her gaze faltered, she found his eyes in the crowd, steady, burning, reminding her, justice, not death. The prosecutor called her name again, gently this time, and Clara's voice finally found its way out. It trembled at first, catching on the edges of memories too raw to touch. She told of the night her brother had been shot, the way the gang had torn her from her home. She told of being dragged from camp to camp, treated as property, her cries ignored. Each word was a wound reopened, but she forced herself onward, because silence had been her cage and speech was her hammer. Gasps rippled through the room as she spoke of the outlaws' cruelty, not just toward her, but toward townsfolk, ranchers, anyone unlucky enough to cross his path. Men who had muttered curses about the gang in private now leaned forward, eyes wide. Women clutched their shawls tighter, some weeping openly. Clara's pain was no longer her own. It belonged to everyone who had been too afraid to speak. The defense tried to rattle her. The lawyer sneered, accusing her of exaggeration, of fabricating to save her own skin. "Weren't you seen riding with him? Didn't you live among them for years?" Shame pricked hot across her face. For a moment her voice faltered. She could feel the outlaw's eyes boring into her, daring her to admit weakness. Then she remembered the canyon, the rifle in her hands, the moment she had chosen to stand, not hide. Clara lifted her chin, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I was among them, because I had no choice. Because every day he reminded me that he could end my life with a word. But today I choose to speak." The courtroom fell silent. Even the defense attorney looked unsettled by the steel in her tone. When she finished, Clara stepped down from the bench, legs trembling but heart strangely light. The judge's gaze followed her, unreadable but proud. She had faced the man who had stolen everything, and for once she had taken something back. As the jury filed out to deliberate, whispers filled the courthouse. Some spoke of the gang's days of terror finally ending. Others muttered that a woman had stood where many men had faltered and had not broken. Clara sat quietly, hands clasped tight, waiting. She didn't know what the verdict would be, not truly, but she knew this. She had told the truth, and that truth had power greater than fear. And when the jury returned, when the foreman's voice rang out declaring guilty, the outlaw's sneer finally cracked. For the first time, Clara saw something in his eyes she had never believed possible. Defeat. The night after the verdict, Santa Fe buzzed with talk. Saloon doors swung open and shut as men toasted the end of the outlaw gang. In the boarding house where Clara stayed, women whispered about her bravery, passing her story from room to room like scripture. Yet Clara herself sat quietly by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of cooling tea, staring at the stars. The trial was over. The outlaw would hang. The people called her courageous, but inside she felt hollow. Years of fear could not vanish in a single day. Justice had been served, yes. But what came after justice? The door creaked. She turned and saw him, the judge, standing in the dim light of the hallway. He removed his hat, his face solemn. "Couldn't sleep either?" Clara shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear his voice." Even now, the judge stepped inside, leaning against the wall. For once, he seemed older, wearier. The endless fire in his eyes banked but not extinguished. "It'll fade," he said softly. "Not tomorrow. Not next week. But one dawn, you'll wake up and realize his voice no longer owns you." She studied him, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the window. "And you? When does it fade for you?" He didn't answer right away. His silence told her enough, perhaps never. His life was a chain of battles, and each face of the condemned lived on inside him. Justice had a cost, and he bore it alone. Clara set down her cup. "You've given me back my life, but I don't know what to do with it. Where does a woman like me go after everything?" The judge's gaze softened. "Anywhere you choose." That's the difference now. No one chooses for you anymore. His words struck her harder than any verdict. Choice. It had been stolen from her for so long, she'd forgotten the word even belonged to her. Tears pricked her eyes, but they were not the tears of despair she had shed so often. They were lighter, almost cleansing. At dawn, she walked with him to the edge of town. The sky was painted in strokes of gold and rose, the air crisp with promise. The gallows stood in the square behind them, a grim reminder, but Clara did not look back. She had seen enough endings. She wanted beginnings. The judge adjusted his saddle as his horse stamped the ground. Clara waited, unsure if he would ride off without a word, vanish back into the shadows where he belonged. Men like him never stayed long in one place. Justice was a road, not a home, but he paused, meeting her eyes. "You've got strength you don't even realize yet," he said. "Don't let anyone take it from you again." Her lips curved, faint but true. "And you? Will you keep chasing men like him?" He swung into the saddle. "Until I can't anymore." For a moment, Clara thought to ask him to stay, to keep the fire of his watchful eyes near her a little longer. But then she remembered his words. "Anywhere you choose." He had given her the freedom to stand alone, and she would not dishonor that gift by clinging to him. The judge tipped his hat, then spurred his horse toward the rising sun. Clara watched him ride away, the figure of justice fading into the horizon. She knew she might never see him again, and yet she didn't feel abandoned. She turned from the road, facing the dawn. Somewhere out there, a life waited for her, a life she could shape with her own hands. For the first time in years, she was not running, not hiding, not surviving. She was living, and as the first warmth of sunlight touched her face, Clara whispered into the morning air, "Justice." Not death. It was not just his vow anymore. It was hers.